Now the cooling tables are there for two primary purposes. Firstly, as we say, to cool the curds and whey, but more importantly to separate the curds from the whey. And you can see that the whey is being encouraged to go through the perforated membranes to ensure that we retain all the curd and the whey goes through for further processing. Now that further processing involves first of all taking out the small amounts of cream that have been left in the whey, and they're extracted through a separator, a centrifuge, and made into butter. What is left then is the whey from which we extract the protein, which gets used for food ingredients. The lactose, which is left then in the whey, is then taken from the water in which it is effectively suspended, and the lactose is then used for animal feed, and the water that is left is sufficiently clean to be able to use it to replace mains water. So we could actually say it's the ultimate in recycling. What is milk in a cow today will actually be tap water tomorrow. You can see back on the cooling table that the curds are being freed from the whey as fast as possible, and you can see a rotating arm there which keeps the curd broken up to allow the whey to drain out. And that's most important, that we drain the whey off as quickly as we possibly can in order to get the curds to the right texture that we're looking for before we mill them and put them into the molds. Once the whey is drained out, we're then looking to open a channel to allow any further drainage to seep into the central perforated channel to allow that whey to get away and allow our curds to develop the texture which is absolutely essential in farmhouse cheese making. Now you'll see there's an awful lot of hand labour going on here, and this is part of what we call our PDO process, our product of designated origin. Only farms which do this process by hand can actually call their cheese West Country farmhouse cheddar, and indeed only those from the West Country can indeed use that PDO. Once the curds have been formed into two banks with a clear central drainage channel, the thing that you probably don't realise at this stage is how much they're fusing together as a one solid mass, or in this case it's two solid mass. And you'll see just how rapidly these curds, these individual pieces of curd no bigger than a grain of wheat, are now all forming together into a solid mass. Now that solid mass we then need to handle, so it's cut into slices, very big slices, and allows further drainage. And you will probably notice as it's happening that the curds on the bottom are well fused in to the mass, and by turning over we actually do the same then for the curds that were on the top. So we're beginning to get a really smooth textured section of curd in each case. And as we go through the process, it is all about improving that texture which we need to make the best cheese. Now by heaping one section of the curd up on top of the other, what we're looking to do is to increase the stretchiness of the curd. So what is actually happening is by increasing the height at which we stack it, we're forcing those lower sections of curd to stretch out. Because what we're looking to do is to produce a texture on this curd which is, if you like, slightly similar to toasted cheese. You know, when you toast the cheese, that the strands of curd, strands of cheese will stretch out, and that's what we're looking to do with our curds, is to make them into that stretchy texture that you will actually see a little more obviously if you toasted the cheese after it's matured. In the cooler in front of you now, there is approximately 1.9 tons of cheese. And when you consider that all this has to be moved a number of times inside an hour, you will recognize just how much physical effort is involved in the traditional hand method of making cheese. You can see now these curds being stacked even higher to increase that stretch that we were referring to earlier. Now they're being stacked 3 high in order to get ourselves into a situation where the stretch is really increased. We're looking for something that's almost catapult elastic by the time it is ready for milling. Now before we can mill it, we have to cut the pieces of curd down to a size that we can feed into the mill. Each of the pieces of curd is being halved in size, and you can see then they're fed into the mill. Now the mill is there to slice these pieces of curd up into small segments about the size of half a thumb. If you can imagine how big half your thumb is, that's about the size that we are looking to cut the curd into. Now, the reason that we're doing that is to ensure that when it comes to adding the salt, we can make certain that the salt is properly mixed throughout the curd. On goes the salt. Now, a lot of people ask me why we put salt onto curd. It is, in fact, a wonderful preservative, and without putting salt onto the curd, the cheese would go rancid. So the salt is used purely as a preservative to ensure that the curd can ripen into a fully matured cheese without any effect of rancidity at all. It is then taken from the cooler and pushed into an auger and drawn by vacuum to the top of our 3 towers. Now, years ago, we used to put the curds into moulds in order to produce a finished cheese. Today, the work is done in the towers. The towers are a 20-foot high column under vacuum with a perforated internal rectangular column, and after 20 minutes, out pops a perfectly shaped rectangular cheese weighing approximately 20 kilos. The cheese is then passed over the weigher for weighing, and at that point they're individually identified to make absolutely certain that during the course of the maturing process we keep our vats of cheese separate from each other and ensure that we have total traceability on each individual cheese back to its source of manufacture. Indeed, we can take it right back to the herds from which the milk was drawn to make the cheese in the first place. Once it's vacuum packed, out it goes to the packing room, where it is encased in 6 boards which effectively look like a box. And if you look very, very carefully at the boards as they are stacked onto the pallet, you will actually see that the weight of the cheese is transferred through the boards, so that no matter how high we stack our blocks of cheese, the shape of the cheese will always remain perfect, regardless of how high the stack is. The curd inside these boards is in fact still at something like 35 or 36 degrees centigrade. What we're looking to do then is to cool that curd as quickly as possible to around 10 to 12 degrees centigrade. Now, it's quite coincidental that 10 to 12 degrees centigrade is the temperature of cheddar caves in which the old original recipe was matured, and we have never found a better temperature at which to mature. So that is the temperature that this cheese is being held at while it's in store. And during that process, the acidification of the cheese that we started with the addition of the rennet back in the cheese vat is still continuing, albeit now at a much slower rate. So what we're now faced with is a really extended period of very slow maturing to produce the character of cheese that we require, the traditional character of farmhouse